talk to celebrities, and every single one of them has had such a hard mental health experience, almost every single one of them. And so many of them, it's like when you would think they were the happiest, when they won a gold medal or when they blew up on Instagram or whatever it was, also happens to be like the hardest time and the time that they felt the worst in their life. And no one would expect that.
Peiman, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for coming to the HQ.
Well, it's super nice.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed by everything you've built, and I'm sure you've heard that a lot. I'm curious, what does a world changer mean to you?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's funny. I think now when we launched a brand, it wasn't like something that I was like always thinking about. You know, now you look at some of the best brands in the world and you could say, you know, Phil Knight changed the world in some ways. And in starting Nike, starting a movement around physical health and running and all those sorts of things. So I think for us, it's like the concept has always been starting at like the very local level. So what we call like a local optimist, you know? So if you're an optimist in your community, then that hopefully inspires others to do the same and trickles across the world instead of being like, we're changing the whole world today. And that's sort of how our brand was built, which is we didn't start with like, here's the master plan. You know, it started as a side project and then started to grow, and we saw the potential of what it can and could be in the future. So World Changer, I think, is a local optimist in their own community. And really everyone's changing the world in that sense daily.
I love that. From what I understand about the brand, it made sense and it connected with people almost immediately. And that's a relatively rare thing. Why did it hit people at such a deep level?
I think there's a couple of things. One is we're very fortunate with the name, and I think the name has so much of the meaning of the brand inside of it, which you don't really have in many brands. You know, even a brand like Nike, it's a great name now, but what did it mean back then? It was a little bit hard to say. I think Madhappy has this like very optimistic and positive message within it that helped us skip a few of the earlier steps, perhaps. But beyond that, I think if you consider the streetwear space, which a lot of people would put us in LA, in New York, that we grew up with, it was a bit like different than what we're doing. And I think a lot of those brands were super cool, but like pretty dark, closed off, like not welcoming. And I think flipping that on its head, having a very like optimistic spin on it with a great name and a great message within it, some of those like underpinnings really gave us the leg up at the start and helped the snowball start rolling.
I hear that, but I also know that there are a lot of people who have had really great names who haven't built companies nearly as successful as yours. So what's the difference there?
Well, I guess, yeah, there is a big difference if you talk about like what happened at the beginning versus like, you know, what have we done since then to try to give ourselves the best chance. And I think we quickly understood that like the name hit a chord with people, just as it did with us when we first talked about it. And it was like, how do we bring that to more people? And how do we do that in, you know, today's day and age, right? We weren't trying to launch a brand as if it was a brand that launched 20 years ago, right? So we really controlled everything. It was a very like social media first type of like messaging. It was really trying to like not be all over Facebook and Instagram ads, but be more focused on like who are people that embody what Madhappy is, what Optimism is and feels like, and how do we have them have the product and share the product. And I think that built some of the initial foundation, and then we followed that up with a lot of these like pop-ups and seasonal stores that would allow you to experience the brand in person, which at the time in 2017, no one was talking about. Everyone's like, physical retail is dead. Like, why would we ever open up stores? E-com is the only way. And I think especially with apparel and something that's like people are so connected to and really try to like show who they are by what they wear, we thought that was really important. And so a lot of those like small differences at the beginning started to compound. And then I think timing wise, it was also amazing because there hasn't been a brand that's talked about mental health in the way that we ended up doing. And we didn't know that at the time, right? It wasn't like concocted, like this is going to be a brand about mental health. But I think because of the name, because of some of like the core values, it gave us a real leg up to be the only brand in that space. And then of course, timing wise, both with COVID and mental health more in the media, it helped elevate our brand because we were there first.
Why mental health, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so I think this would go back all the way to the beginning of how this brand started. And so that would start with my brother, who was 2 years younger than me, Noah, and Mason, my other partner. We were good friends in high school, and he and my brother were always into fashion, had started a brand together in high school, right? And both of them really creative kids and trying to figure out their path. School was really not for them. And in doing so, fortunately living in LA, you can go downtown, find some vendors, figure out how to make almost anything. And they had an experience doing that, and really their first like work experience of any kind. And I think both of them knew that like the traditional college path was not going to be for them. Mason had dropped out. My brother never went to college, and they were just sort of trying to find their way. And after a year or two of that sort of fizzling out, my brother started doing some like celebrity styling, interning for someone. And like, really that was his like college education in many ways, traveling, like working with musicians, athletes, all kinds of amazing people. And I think through that, he sort of learned, okay, like this first thing we did didn't work, right? Mason was also at a time in his life where he was feeling down, right? And he was my first friend back in high school that I ever spoke about mental health with. He was really my only friend that I knew that seriously struggled. He never met his biological dad. He had to move a lot as a kid. And so a lot of just challenging things growing up. And he was in therapy since he was 7. Like, I didn't really know what therapy even was back in high school. And it definitely wasn't like talked about so openly. And he was just trying to like figure out his path. And he thought of this name, Madhappy, in a text message to someone, just like, I'm mad happy for you. And as soon as he messaged that, and I'm sure you had that as one of your questions, but as soon as he messaged that, he was like, wow, like, like something hit him, like there's something in this name. It's like such like a weird thing because they're two super common words, but like when you put them together, it like has this whole different meaning. And if you think about it, it's like there's like a very much a mental health message within that. That maybe wasn't obvious to us right at the beginning, but like that really was the underpinnings of the brand. And very early on, we did this like small panel in our store where we talked about mental health, and we saw how open like the audience was to talking about it, but maybe not having a way to do that. And so that's how it really got us thinking. And what could that be? Like, what is a brand that champions mental health and changes it for the better?
So it was basically looking at all the things that you did, looking at all the ways the brand was being presented, and then figuring out which ways really resonated with people and doubling down on that.
I would say like the things that resonated with us also resonated with like the audience. So it would be that sort of more optimistic spin on things. It would be that more like inviting community vibe that the brand had from the beginning. And I think the mental health piece was like there, but we saw like, wow, like this is maybe bigger than we thought, because there hasn't been really a brand that's talked about this, dived into this a little bit more. And it's such it's like an uncomfortable thing because like it's so complex. So it's like, what does being a brand about mental health even mean? Especially back then, we had no idea, like we're not doctors, we're not therapists, all this sort of stuff. And so I think it became clear that there could be a lane for us there as like the bigger mission and impact that we could have as a brand.
So like we were saying before, 5 years ago, it wasn't really talked about mental health the same way it's talked about today. And you've clearly ridden that wave at some point. I'm curious, like, what is the current version of mental health, the thing that's not really being talked about, but in 2028, people will be like, oh, this is part of the conversation?
With mental health or generally?
Generally.
That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of things. I think for myself, I think I've tried to always be listening to amazing podcasts and people that end up talking about things a lot earlier. And I've always been into like a lot of the health and wellness stuff. So I would probably say there's a few things around, like, one is like how much we use our phones and how much we're on our phones and like not realizing maybe some of the impacts that could have. 2 is like potential like negative impacts of just like phone, like being on your body basically at all times of the day. And then I think like things around nutrition, around the types of food, the stuff that we should be avoiding, all of those things that's so prevalent in foods. I think a lot of those things, I mean, there's so many that I think we're going to look back on and be like, can't believe we did those things. So yeah, we could go into any of those if you want.
Well, what's so super cool about you in particular is that it seems like from like even everything you're doing on social, I can see that your one foot is in the future and one foot is in the present. Does that dichotomy, do you ever feel that of like, oh, I'm doing this collaboration with NFTs, but like no one knows what NFTs are in the grand scheme of it, or the impact that it'll have?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, just like my curiosity has always been into new things and like into like the future, really since I was like in 6th or 7th grade and started like learning about kind of websites and being able to look stuff up and all of that. And I was always into like more of like the tech side of things myself, just growing up, like, and then got into, you know, when I got into podcasts, I think it was a whole different world because, you know, now you have access to like listen to anything about anything, which is really cool. And so, yeah, I think it's like sort of like I always want to be learning about new things. Again, I agree with you. Like not everything also has to like apply to like our business today or even down the line, but I think it does help me feel more well-rounded and just like have a better understanding of things across the board. And I think early on, sometimes I would think like, should I not learn this stuff right now? It's like not really relevant to what I'm doing and I could learn more about what I'm doing. But I think what I've found is like, you can't really control the things you're interested in learning about. You have to just like let it unfold. And I think in interesting ways, it'll still impact and benefit the business that you're building too.
What's your strategy for learning?
Good question. I mean, I think it definitely evolves and there could always be more. And I think that's the tough part. And I think there could be more, and then it could also like, you could also improve the quality, which are two different things. You know, I think I'm so used to listening to 20 podcasts a week, right? 20 episodes at like 2x speed. And that's amazing in one sense, but it's also like, did I really learn anything? Because like, I'm like, you know, finding like every minute of free time to do this, or, you know, I'm reading one book a month, which like is good because like, that's what I could do right now in the time I feel like I have. But also like, what about time that I'm just not trying to like stimulate myself every second? So it's really interesting. Like actually last weekend, I didn't use like my phone or any electronics for like 36 hours. And it was really hard because like, I never go on walks not listening to something, or I never work out and not listen to like a podcast, you know? So I think like my learning strategy is, I guess, just trying to find a balanced way to do it. And I think also like not feel like I'm like missing out on something if I like don't listen to every single podcast, because I think I often do feel that way.
What spurred the decision to do the 36-hour fast from technology or the phone?
So I was talking to my therapist about feeling that I'm always very restless, and I feel like I can't, one, I use my phone a lot for sure, but also like, you know, I'm listening to a podcast. If I'm not listening to a podcast, like I'm calling one of my friends or I'm doing XYZ thing, and not having enough of those moments of like not doing anything and being like, oh, I'm bored, like it's fine type of thing. So he recommended like, oh, like, you know, he was like, you should try 24 hours, like no electronics. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, I think I could do that. I've never really tried that before, but I'm down to try. And I was like, I'll try to do 36 hours, you know, like Friday night to Sunday morning. And my girlfriend, Sarah, was also happened to be out of town. So it was like this very interesting time, because like I had to like pre-make any plans I wanted to have on Saturday, and then just kind of go with that. And you know, I think it was pretty, I don't want to call it game changing because it's a little bit weird to say that from one day, but I do think I learned a lot.
Well, I even noticed myself, I put out a thread on the best decision of my life, which was not to use technology for 5 days. And it got an incredible response, because I think there is something really needed in today's day and age of people talking about less phone usage, like we were saying before. Yeah. And it's like, what could we say? Like, where do you get your most creative ideas from?
I mean, I also think like part of it is like during the week, at times I feel like there's way too much in the schedule in terms of like meetings and like plans and like not enough like free time and open time. And so I think the weekend is one good place for that, but I also think everyone should be getting that every day as well. And so I think what we always talk about here, especially like as like partners with Noah and Mason, is like, why do we feel like we can't have more like unstructured time where we could just talk about things and like not have a specific goal or outcome from it, but see what comes of it? And I think those times, and also times after I do spend a little time away, or when I feel my best or most creative or most productive or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. How did your parents, your dad being an architect and your mom being an interior designer, shape Madhappy?
Well, I would say like first and foremost, them moving to a new country, when we were really young is the only reason we're here today. And I think that's a massive sacrifice to move like in your early 40s to a new country where you don't speak the language. And I couldn't imagine doing that for any reason or for anyone. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second piece is like, it's also very hard to move to a new country and be able to like create a business, which they've done together, and provide for our family for the last whatever 20 plus years that we've lived here. And so I think for me and my brother, it always gave us one like a big sense of gratitude of like, we get to be here, we get to play in this like amazing game and do whatever we want, right? Start a company, even if it fails, then you could start another one. And that's not true everywhere in the world. But then two, also seeing kind of their, how hard they worked, the sacrifices they made, and then just like the ups and downs of that, I think teaches us a lot and gave us such a good foundation for starting this business. And of course, like very different industries and very different scales as well. But I think it allowed us to level up in many ways because of like the sacrifices that they made.
What I was really trying to get out of that question was about design. And there's something specific to your aesthetic and your design. And I'm curious how you went about improving your design skills and improving your aesthetic skills, or was that something that was just born into you because your parents clearly both have it?
Good question. I will say Mason and my brother, and especially my brother, are the main ones focused on like the design side. And I would say both of them have an amazing eye and really have crafted the brand and the vision and how that shows up visually. And so I think, yeah, one of our advantages was that like we've done it very much our own way when it comes to design, and we've built a strong brand now over almost 6 years without feeling like we're taking from all these other brands, but really just in our own lane. And so I think for sure my brother got that from my parents in many ways and adapted that into what we've been able to build.
It's cool. It's really cool. Why are you the CEO? Because there are 4 co-founders, and I'm sure each one of them, was there a discussion of like, I'll be the CEO, no, I'll be the CEO, or was it just an obvious thing of like, no, Peiman's going to be the CEO?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for the first few years, we didn't have like super defined titles, but I also think that people have different skill sets, and for us, that's always been pretty clear, and we've all focused in different lanes. And so I think it wasn't like a contentious thing in any way, really. It was just sort of like, now we're at a size where we were at the time that we did it, maybe 20, 25 people. We were like, let's just be more clear. It helps the rest of the team. It helps us. We understand the lanes. We understand who makes what decisions, and who's best suited to make each decision. So that's how we came to it. And yeah.
And what is the difference between going from 4 people, just you 4, to 20 people working for you and then 60, or is there 50? How many people work now for Madhappy?
At the HQ level, we're probably around 35, but like with retail, it gets up there for sure.
So it's like, what's the difference from going from 4 to 20?
Yeah, I mean, I think 4, you know everything that's going on, obviously, and you can sit in one room. I think the big difference happens when not everyone is in one room anymore, right? And so I think going beyond that, even from 15 to 20, it's still pretty easy to be able to like really have a sense of every single thing that's going on. I think once teams start to shape and, there's team sizes of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 people that are really functioning on their own, have a leader on that side, and then, an amazing team around them, then everything that we do has to change, because now what we're doing is really putting trust in them to help build that side of the business and that piece of what we're doing. And of course, figuring out ways where we as founders can communicate the vision and then the strategy around it, but then allowing them to build on it from there and not try to micromanage every situation. I think it becomes second nature to think that way at the beginning when the team's so small, but then letting go of that and moving on to now, not just thinking about what are we doing today or what are we doing next month, but what's going to happen over the next 3 years is the biggest change probably.
When you think about what you've built, what are you most proud of?
The piece that I'm personally most proud of, I'm proud of many things, and I think one, being able to start the brand at such a young age is fortunate, I would say, because we didn't start it with this sort of like timeline in mind of we want to do it for 5 years and sell the business. We started when I was like 23, my brother was 21. We were all around that age, and I think it gave us a lot of time, and so I feel really proud that we've been able to accomplish what we have been able to in 5 years, 5, 6 years, but that there's so much time ahead, and we still have so much room to go, and we all feel good about that. That's one piece. I think the second piece is like the way that we built the brand was more in this like high-end aspirational way, in that we never took like these like easy paths out, whether it be like huge discounts, like huge Black Friday sales, a lot of like paid marketing, like that sort of thing, to just like try to inorganically grow a brand. And instead what we did is like really built this foundation with the products we were releasing, the stories around mental health, great partnerships with other brands and people. And I think that that's built something that can last a really long time. And so I feel really proud about that, and how some of the mental health side of what we've done has really impacted individual people across the world. I think that's pretty cool. We start all of our full team meetings with this like mental health message that someone sent, whether it's our CX team or someone else, on email. And I think that that's pretty awesome, because a lot of times, you put out this content, and I think for us, it's always been pretty clear that like the mental health stuff, maybe it's not for everyone, right? Maybe not everyone wants to like read the stuff that we're putting out there, but if one person's helped by one piece of the content, then that's amazing to us. And so being able to like share that to ourselves, but also to the whole team, I think is something that I'm personally super proud of.
That's cool that you guys do that, with starting each meeting with a message from somebody. And I think it's good to keep that top of mind, especially for the mission. Is there anything that you guys do internally that people, any practice in specifically that people might be surprised that you do, or that you think has made outsized impact on the brand and building it into what you've become?
I think some of the basic stuff, I think we have a team here that we think is amazing, and not everyone has to be like super senior to be able to make a big impact. And I think the balance of some of the right senior people, but also amazing more junior people, has been a great thing that we've been able to build here, and not have so many layers of hierarchy. So allowing so many more people to have access to, whether it's like the founders or other people in the organization, has been amazing. The second thing I would say is like, it just like takes a lot of hard work. It's some of the basics, but like I think we've worked extremely hard across the board, like the entire organization, in trying to accomplish what we think is a very big and ambitious goal as a company, and what we're doing. Like we always say, it's like, it's not supposed to be easy, and it's not going to be like super smooth sailing, but I think everyone who's here has been able to understand that and like work in that way towards this like bigger place that we're going as a brand.
Has there ever been a moment where you're like, I'm not going to do this anymore? Or like,
I mean, I think I would say that in any startup journey, there's many ups and downs, and that never ends, so there's always hard times. I don't know if I've ever been like, I'm not going to do this anymore, but there's definitely been times where I'm like, damn, like I thought we wouldn't have like this type of like problem again, or I never knew this could happen, or blah, blah, blah. But I think in those times, it's like because we've dealt with it and been doing it for so long, you just like know that that one's going to pass as well.
Okay, so take me to the first one.
The very first one?
The very first one, because there's somebody who's listening to this that is going to experience that.
I mean,
and they're starting their journey.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of early ones. I would say initially, when we launched a brand, we launched it and didn't do enough due diligence, and we didn't own the Madhappy trademark, and this random guy owned it, and we ended up negotiating something with him and buying it, and now we're fully protected. But at the time, he made this like claim on the name and got our Instagram page like wiped out for like a week or something. And of course, like at that time, like that's like the biggest thing we had, our biggest marketing channel, all of those pieces. And it put us in like this really, really weird, scared spot of like, oh, are we gonna have to change the name? What are we gonna have to do? And so I think that was one moment I always remember as like something that was pretty intense, because like for us as like super young founders of this like tiny business, like we were like, okay, like I don't know, like maybe it's done, or like, and the guy wasn't super reasonable, so I would say like it didn't help. And I think we were able to get through it, but that was definitely a crazy one.
What you do in that time? Who do you go to? Where do you go for support, and where do you go for guidance on the right steps?
I mean, at that time,
we hired the mafia.
Yeah, I would say at that time, I think like resourcefulness is like one of the most important qualities of like anyone in any startup, because we didn't have all the resources. So you really just have to figure out how to do things and be super scrappy with it. I think for us, we spoke to a lawyer or two just to get their take, but then it was sort of like, how do we convince someone that this is a small thing we're doing and it's not a big deal for them to sell it to us, but while at the same time like understanding like some of the risks and continuing to operate in some of those pieces. But I think we got through it very fortunately. There's another world where like you could have never sold type of thing, and so feel good about that for sure.
It's funny because I remember researching and listening to a podcast where you said you bought the Madhappy Instagram for a very small amount, but it's not that. That's a
different story. Yeah. So that was this guy Greg Williams, actually a very nice and normal guy in that instance, and I had just been DMing him for like a year. He had never answered because he didn't really check his messages, and finally one day he answered, and I was like, hey, we would really love to get the handle, and he wasn't like super crazy about it, and agreed at a very small price, and I got him his handle at Greg Williams in exchange. So,
oh wow, you hooked it up for him.
Yeah, wow, it was funny.
Greg Williams is the man. Good stuff, Greg.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about like some of the dark moments or the beginning moments of like, God, I don't know if this is gonna work. What was the first moment you were like, oh my God, this is really working, and take me through there?
Definitely a few moments over the first couple of years. One of them was our first year. We haven't really done anything on the wholesale side, but the exception is like one thing that we did with the store Colette in Paris in 2017. So the store was basically the most famous store in Paris, was closing at the end of 2017 after like a historic 20 plus year run. And we had found a contact to her and had pitched her this thing on like this hoodie that we would do that would be collaborative to sort of celebrate the closing and their last collaboration ever. And she agreed to like a very small number of them, and we made probably like 100, but we knew it was amazing. We probably made an extra 150 just to have for ourselves, and know that she would want to order more. And she released 100. It sold out right away, and we sold her the rest. Those sold out right away as well. And then she was wearing it on the last day of the store being open. The whole staff wore it because we gave one to each of them as well, and it was all over like Business of Fashion, all these places. And so that was a really cool first moment, and we also saw sort of the power of what some of these partnerships could do.
When you spoke before about how it was about convincing the guy who had Madhappy about like how you were small, but like a big part of the brand is convincing other people that you're bigger than you actually are for most of it, especially in the early stages of it. How do you go about partnering with amazing brands and putting yourself in the perspective of like, this is bigger than it actually is, so that people take us more seriously?
Yeah, I think that's like the best question, because for for anyone that's doing anything in the early days, it's like everything that you can do to make it like seem and feel bigger, you should do it, and I think for us, some of the pieces that maybe we didn't realize at the beginning would help us feel bigger, like we did 7 pop-ups in the first 18 months that we were around, and some of those were in really dope places and really cool cities, and LA, New York, Aspen. And when you see something multiple times and then that physical connection to a brand, I think so many brands started just on e-com, and it's like, how can you really have a real like connection with that brand when you've been to 3 or 4 of our pop-ups? Then you're like, oh, like they're here also, like, oh, it's bigger than I thought, or oh, they did this collaboration with Colette, it's bigger than I thought. And then once you start having a little bit of a track record, it's a lot easier for the snowball to get going, because we're like, oh, we did these 4 stores and we did Colette, like, of course you want to work with us. And then when you add like the mental health piece that like no one else could get besides working with us, I think it made it a really cool like proposition, and I think we were doing something that felt genuinely unique and impactful.
Yeah, because it's a lot easier when LeBron James is wearing your stuff, or Spike Lee, or Jay-Z. It's like crazy, and it's so clearly big when you see that.
Yeah.
But in the early days, it's like, no, we're big. We're big. We're trying to be big.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like, how does that feel now, where it's like the biggest celebrities in the world all wear Madhappy? What does that feel like?
Yeah, and I think that's also, and a little bit of that at the beginning also, which was like, we saw how much entertainers, musicians, athletes, really cared about mental health and how big of an impact that had on their lives by their willingness to like want to wear the product, want to buy the product. And so when we started to grow, we continued to make a conscious effort of like having people that we thought would resonate with the brand, trying to get into contact with them, trying to get them product, and not really with any expectations. But I think what we saw over time was that the brand resonates with a lot of people. It's a very mental health and optimism and sort of these types of feelings and emotions. We all have them. We all feel them every day, even if we recognize that or not. And so there's this sort of universal nature to our brand that I think a lot of celebrities and just people in general were very open to, and maybe hadn't seen before. And so I think that definitely helped. And then of course, like, we've had amazing moments, and we grew up watching LeBron play, and then he wore it to the NBA finals during the bubble, and that was amazing, and that was a cornerstone moment for us of just, wow, like, the brand has progressed, and wow, this is amazing, and continuing to obviously motivate us and the team to like keep going.
Do you look at competition at all? Do you factor competition into what you do, or is it just head down and focused on yourself?
I mean, I would say that we of course like look at what other brands do, because I think there's many things to be inspired by and to learn from, but we've always said, and we always do feel like we're pretty much in our own lane, and we've sort of created something that wasn't there before. And so, like, if, when Nike started, like, yes, they looked at the other footwear brands, but like there wasn't like a footwear brand that is what Nike is today then. Even Adidas wasn't like that much part of like the fabric of the culture that Nike became. And so I think, we're always trying to learn, and there's always people to learn from, and I try to talk to a lot of amazing other founders of brands and stuff just to learn, really, and it's like, obviously no one can do it on their own, but I think a healthy balance of that and just trusting what we're doing has also been good so far.
That's sweet. When you look at happiness and how it has become almost the status symbol of today, where it's not about how much money you have, but it's about how happy do you feel. What are some of the downsides of that being the cultural currency, and what are we giving up by seeking or attempting for happiness at all times?
So the biggest thing, in my opinion, around mental health in general is like talking about the spectrum of it versus just like any one thing. So I think part of what gave mental health this like bad reputation was thinking about like just like the dark, depressive thoughts as like what mental health is, right? So if someone's depressed, you're like, oh, like that's what mental health is. But if someone was like, oh, I'm feeling great today, you wouldn't be like, oh, he's having an amazing day, like that's also mental health.
Yeah.
And so what we've tried to talk about a lot is like the spectrum, right? Which is there's great stuff, there's really bad stuff, and there's everything in between. And I think, what you have to consider is like, we're not always going to be in that like great camp. Of course, we want to do things and set up our life so that we do feel our best on average or most of the time, but also understanding that like all the other emotions, right? Sadness, anger, all of those things, we will feel them at times, and understanding the importance of those as part of a well-rounded experience. There's a big difference between, something really bad happening in your life, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to have a level of suffering over that. I think what tends to happen is perhaps some people inflict even more suffering on themselves in those situations, and maybe that's a pattern that you want to break, versus I shouldn't feel sad and I'm going to be overly optimistic even during a sad time. And so I think that's what you're giving up if like what you're talking about is like, I need to feel happy 100% of the time, because that's also not true to like the human experience, and that there are going to be days for whatever reason, even if you do everything right, that you don't feel as good as you felt the day before, but that's still you. And those feelings are still you, and you have to feel them for them to be able to pass, and if you try to block it out too much, then it could lead to something worse down the line.
It's interesting. When you think about like our culture in the United States, we have one of optimism and looking at the bright side of things. What do you think are some things that have contributed to the optimistic nature of the United States in general, and how can we help lead people more to that frame of mind?
The U.S. has definitely done that, and I think, the whole land of opportunity thing, and like the fact that so many of the best companies in the world have been started here, I think really has painted a picture that anything is possible here, and that's what I believe, and I think that's why I was saying I was like so thankful for my parents for moving here, because it's like that's not possible everywhere. And so I think the U.S. has done a really good job with that. And so I think the parts that become challenging are like, how do we make sure we continue to do that and continue to like foster a place where everyone does feel good, feel safe, feel like they can do whatever they want, and it doesn't matter how much money you have today or how successful you've been, but that you can find a path to begin working and to begin building yourself up to be whatever it is you want to be. So I think that piece of it and that like optimism is definitely like embedded into what at least I feel in being an American.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because as the world has become more connected, I recently saw a Gallup poll that we've collectively become less happy. Like they asked people in 2006 to, I believe, 2022, where they tracked the feelings of anger, sadness, and it has increased dramatically since 2006. And I'll flash it on the screen so people can see it. But why is that the case? Why have we collectively become less happy when we've become more connected and conditions have gotten better?
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question, but I would say what my thought would be is like, one is like the condition has always gotten better from, thousands of years ago. Every year there's been improvement. But I think people don't really feel that change because you only know what you know when you were alive, right? Like everyone now is living a better life than kings were 200 or 300 years ago. But we don't necessarily feel that way because I think everything's relative, right? And I think the relative piece is what's challenging, because you look at famous people, you look at, these people and what they're doing on Instagram or whatever. And I think people are quick to like judge and be like, wow, like this person's life is so much better than mine. And like, like my life sucks, that type of thing. Whereas like the famous person is like, hey, like actually like I'm dealing with so many hard things too. And I know that it's like maybe hard for you to relate, and so it's like, it's this like whirlwind of things where it's like the famous person has all this pressure on them. And because of all the lights and cameras feel less happy. And then like the person looking up to them is like, damn, like I want that, or I want this, or I want that. And I think like that piece of it has become a lot more challenging in this like connected world, and before if, you lived in a community and all you knew were the people in the community, it still happened, right? You still compared yourself to whoever in the community had the most status or was whatever. But But I think it's become harder because now everyone can do that with everyone in the world.
And we could see everyone doing amazing things, and it's like, well, I'm not doing that. But is there anything we could do to help people play the comparison game less, or to have a better understanding of their own position and be grateful for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think that that's around both the education piece around like, hey, like one is like your own self-worth, your own mental health is like an inner game, and like there are tools you need to build yourself to continually like feel good about who you are. And then it's okay if you want to improve and you want to get better, but it's like, you know where you are today, what you want to do in the future and how you want to build up to get there, versus saying like, I want to be that person. It's a lot easier said than done, because like most of the media, most of like the narratives are around, oh, like you're not rich, or you're not this, or you're not that. And so I think it's hard, but I think talking about it, I think people, for example, our podcast, we talk to celebrities and every single one of them has had such a hard mental health experience, almost every single one of them. And so many of them, it's like when you would think they were the happiest, when they won a gold medal or when they blew up on Instagram or whatever it was, also happens to be like the hardest time and the time that they felt the worst in their life. And no one would expect that, you know? And I think after hearing enough of those stories, hopefully people start understanding and feeling more confident in that, like, we all share these experiences. We all have our ups and downs, and all we can do is just like do our best and continue to hopefully improve over time if that's what we want.
Has that also been the case for you, where the better it appeared externally, the less internally whole you've been?
So I wouldn't say exactly for me. And I would say like, I could see how that would be the case with something like, you know, Lindsey Vonn in the Olympics and a lot of the stuff that led up to that moment and all the lights and pressure of that. I think, of course, we feel some sort of pressure with being founders of this brand, but not in that way in any way. So very fortunate for that. I would say for me, the times that I've had that have been hard haven't necessarily mapped to how I was doing professionally at the time. I've had 2 or 3 experiences in my life that I felt more down than I usually am, and those were kind of independent and not linked necessarily.
Why did you feel so uncomfortable to discuss your own journey with mental health? And I believe episode 37 of the podcast, maybe it was a little late.
When I did it, sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that generally speaking, I haven't been one, like I think Mason's very good at talking about how he's feeling and being super vulnerable, especially on the podcast. And for me, when we started the show, like, was really also the first time I started therapy, and I ever even had to like think about how I felt and some of those pieces that I had never done before. And so I think it's taken a lot of getting used to kind of breaking the ice for the first time and understanding how I want to share it and what pieces I want to share and when I share it. And I think I've gotten a lot better at it now, and I've tried to be as open as possible, and not only on the podcast, whether that's with my girlfriend or my parents or my brother or my friends, but I think it feels unnatural because you just haven't done it, you know, and then you have to do it a good amount to like make that feeling go away.
What in particular have you found that's helped make that feeling go away, other than just sharing it more?
Yeah, I mean, I think sharing it is one piece, because one thing I learned is like, you know, if you hold things inside, and this was back to the point around if you try to like over optimism yourself out of feeling sad, you know, that feeling's not actually going away. It's just kind of like getting buried inside. And I think the buried inside thing is like, all of us have things that like we've buried in some way. And I think therapy and talking about sort of the past and potential things that you're dealing with today help the actual you saying the words out loud or writing them down. They work kind of in different ways, allows that to come out of your body so that it can be let go in some way. Maybe you're not 100% letting it go the very first time you talk about it, but even that relief of like 10% of it is let go when you talked about it the first time, you do feel that. And I think there's like this like reward feeling of sharing something that felt difficult, I think like another way is like, I would find myself like in therapy, which I've like done weekly for the past 2 years. And it's like, there's certain things I would talk about, but there's also certain things I was like, no, like I don't really feel like talking about that right now, or like it feels hard to talk about that. And those are actually the things you do need to talk about. So I'd say that's what I would say.
Makes sense. When you think about what you buried for that has come up as a result of therapy or something that you've learned internally, what is the thing that you buried? And I'll give you an example. It's like, for me, I started doing this meditation, and every day I would meditate for 60 minutes straight. And by like the third week of it, I realized that I was burying the situation where this kid shoved me into a locker senior year of high school for 10 years. And I never actually...
Like one time he did that?
One time he shoved me into a locker. It was like it's a long story. I've told on the podcast before, but it like takes me back to a bad place. I'm like, holy shit, I started lifting weights because of doing this. And I started, taking myself seriously in this aspect just because I felt that shame of that moment and I buried it for 8 years. I didn't even realize that I did. Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
How long did you do the 60-minute thing for?
I did it for 8 years.
Wow.
I mean, 8 months rather. And I said 8 years. That'd be amazing if I did. But no, 8 months I did it. And it was within 2 weeks that it came up, because I started to hear all the voices in my head, and I was like, I'm holding on to this situation or that situation. So
what time were you doing that at?
First thing upon waking.
And just breathing, or like
just watching everything that came to mind. So I'd watch.
But then were you trying to let it go?
No. I ended up letting it go because I realized that it was there, and I felt like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was there. I feel compassion.
Eyes closed?
Eyes closed.
Wow.
I feel compassion for this guy, and I know he must have been in a difficult place when he did that, and like...
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, and do you still meditate?
Yes, 20 minutes in the morning.
Nice. Love that.
And pretty religiously.
Yeah, that's amazing. I would say for me, one of the things has been like, so I moved to the U.S. when I was 6, didn't speak English, and I think it's hard to remember everything that happened because I was so young, but not speaking the language, not having any friends, feeling like you don't fit in, I think impacted me more than I expected today, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of those pieces around doing really well in school, trying to be super successful, trying to work really hard, always be listening to something, like I was saying, all of those things are really tied to like, why do I feel like I always need to like improve, and I've always believed that like improving is a good thing. And I talk about it in therapy, and my therapist brought up this thing around, if you're always telling yourself that you have to be better or get better, then you're also sending yourself a message that like you're not good enough with who you are today, And so I think there's a balanced way to think about that, which is like telling yourself that like you love the way you are today and you want to improve on certain things, or you want to learn more, or whatever it is. And I think trying to have that has really helped me.
You've said before that some of your self-talk is, I am perfect exactly the way I am, and I can improve a little bit.
Yes, exactly. That's a good one.
Is there any other mantras you talk about often or that play in your head that have helped you?
I just believe that I was definitely born feeling more optimistic than average. And I don't think that like I trained that in any way. I think I was just very fortunate with that. And because of that, I've always felt like a confidence, not like a confidence like I know everything, but like a confidence like I know I can figure it out. And I think that served me very well in life, And I think, of course, confidence builds as you start doing things, and some of them work, some of them don't work, and you rebuild back up in times where maybe you fail at something that you thought you were really good at. But I think that optimism is very closely tied to like any success that we've had so far, and hopefully that, any that we'll have in the future.
What about getting cut from the basketball team? How did that shape you?
Yeah, so that's another crazy story. So in 8th grade, I broke my hip skiing. I went off of a jump, landed on my back, and now I have a plate, 6 screws in my hip, and thankfully I'm all good, and it happened at a really young age so that I could heal from it. But really, like, I only had like a month before like kind of tryouts and all this stuff, and it was super sad, It was definitely like in high school, that was like probably like one of the lowest moments I had, because at the time, you know, like that's like everything for someone who's just like a freshman in high school, and not making it was just like such a tough experience for me, I would say, because I that's kind of like the first time that like I felt like I failed at something, you know, and obviously breaking my hip, like I couldn't have controlled that. But I think, yeah, that's a great point. From that point, I continued to work really hard. Of course, like made the team the next year and all that, and played over the next couple of years. And I think high school basketball for me was a very foundational experience in my life, because it's more related to like real life than like school, because of the ups and downs, the team nature of it, the you win or you lose type of environment, where that's not really the case in school. For me, it wasn't. And so I think, again, like a very foundational moment that, you know, I had to like rebuild my own confidence in that, like, I can accomplish this thing, you know?
So I got cut from my 7th grade basketball team, but I took that as a sign. I'm not good enough. I can't improve. That's just the way it is. I didn't know otherwise. I didn't know I could actually try to do things and I would get better if I did them. What in your head? I mean, you had the excuse of being like, well, I got into an accident, so therefore if I was 100%, then I could. But have you always had that mindset of like, it's going to get better if I just put in work to something?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I definitely like felt that I really wanted to play basketball in high school and felt that I should be on the team. And, you know, some things are very political as well. And I felt like there was definitely some things that like got in the way of that. And I think I've always like, you know, growing up, it's just like moving here and it's like, you don't have like connections. It's hard to get like internships. All of those things I think fed into this like larger thing of like, I have to work really hard, and that's sort of the only piece I can control, and being focused on that. And so I think the amount of time I put into basketball in high school is like crazy amount of time, like
Really?
hard to even like explain, is very indicative of like now how I think about work. And of course, like there's a balance to like rest and play and stuff that I've learned a lot more now, but it just takes a lot of hard work, and it still might not go your way, and all of these things. And so I think for me, it was just like the confidence to like just work really hard.
Well, take me through like the progression of how you've worked hard at Madhappy, and what hard work looks like today compared to what hard work looked like at year 2 of building the business.
I think we were just like very fortunate that we had 4 people, because we didn't have like a budget to hire people. And so 4 people is a lot better than 2 people working on something, because there's just more people that could do more work. And so, I mean, hard work, what did hard work mean at the time? It was just also an hours thing, right? Like that was like purely hours, because you have to ship all the stuff, but then you have to figure out what we're doing next, and then you have to help build all the pop-ups, and then you have to do all the customer support, all of that stuff. And so that at the beginning, yeah, it's just a function of really hours, and also just trying to figure it out, being positive, knowing that not everything's going to work, and just like keep going. After that, I think now it's like, I think hours still plays a big role, and it always will. And I think that that's like, whether that means like I'm physically working or I'm reading or I'm doing something, I do think that's part of it. You know, I think hours resting is also a part of it, right? And like that 36 hours without my phone is also a part of it. But I think to think that you can get to a place, I mean, at least I haven't found that I can just like coast type of thing, and like expect like the business to do super well just because like we've been around for 5 years. So I'd say like the way it's changed now is just trying to like be smarter about like how we're setting up each of the teams, giving them the tools to be successful, getting out of their way in their right ways, not having confusing messages like kind of like around with teams, and like so clarity around that stuff. And of course, like we're not perfect at it, but I think we've gotten better. Hopefully Grace would agree. But I think like that, you know, because now it's hours is a big part of it, but it's also like how, you know, how is the output, and like output is really controlled also by the process and clarity and all of those pieces, because it's not necessarily more people means more work or better work. It's like all the pieces having to work well together, and it's more of like this puzzle, where before it was just like, it's just us four, so like you do that, you do this, I do that, keep going, keep going, keep going.
What personal metrics have you used to indicate whether or not you are successful in your day-to-day life? And the reason why I ask this is because it's like happiness and our mental health is like, there's no number you get. Like, it's a number that you yourself build. And for example, like I rate each one of my days on a +2 to -2 scale at the end of it. And so that's a good indicator of like,
Where'd you get that from? Tim's show? What?
Tim Ferriss with Jim Collins. Yeah, you listened to it, of course you did. So because Jim Collins said this on this podcast, I was like, all right, like I'll try this out. And it's really helpful to figure out my own mental health and how I'm doing. But are there any particular metrics that you found to be successful in figuring out your own mental health?
I actually love that one, though I've never done it, because I really understand that concept. I feel like it like makes a lot of sense to me versus like a 1 to 10 type scale, which I'm like is so subjective, and it's more about how I feel that day. I think, yeah, for me, it's like the way I try to track it is a little bit around the habits piece. So it's like I can't necessarily control how I'm going to feel on any one given day, but I know, for example, if I do these types of things like workout wise during the week, this type of sleep during the week, and this type of XYZ fun activity during the week, generally I feel good, you know? And then I think I try to like optimize that a little bit over time. Like, for example, right now I'm not doing any meditation as a part of anything. And I think, you know, I'm definitely missing something by not doing that, right? And
Have you ever?
yeah, I have. And I've done like different spans of maybe 3 to 6 months straight. And then I sometimes fall out of it, and then I go back into it. And I haven't been able to find the perfect way so that it's been in my life for like a year plus at once, which I'm trying to do, but I'm also not being like, tomorrow I'm starting. And so I think that's how I think about it. I would say is like, did I do the habits piece right for what I feel and I've learned that works for me? Some things you can't control. Sometimes you're going to sleep less than you thought, or you can't work out as much. And that, you know, I think it's a little bit up to chance, a little bit up to just think you've done a lot of hard work and put a lot of time into it. And so hopefully you still feel good when those habits break for a little, but getting back into it's just always been important to me.
Why do we not do the things that we know we should?
I think, I mean, everything is like, is it actually a priority for you? Clearly what I've said to myself right now is like, you know, I have this thing around when I like to be at the office, just personally for me, and being able to work before like it's super busy. And so then if I do want to do the meditation thing in the morning, I have to wake up X amount earlier. But then if I do that, I need to sleep X amount sooner, which has been really hard recently for me, just because of a variety of things. So then it's like, am I giving that up? And then if I'm giving that up, it's not, you know, it doesn't only impact me, it also impacts my girlfriend. So like, you know, some of those things I think are, you know, I say I want to do meditation, but I'm also not saying I want to start today. You know, I do want to start. And I think kind of this 36 hours thing was a very interesting meditation, because like you're alone and, you know, your eyes don't always need to be closed to like be like kind of like meditating. And I think that was a close experience to that. And it made me feel a lot of the positive effects I would feel from meditation when I was doing it. And so I think things like that could also help.
Whose life do you look at and you say, I admire the way this person lived, or this person lives?
That's a good question. I would say, do you listen to the founder spot?
David Senra?
Yeah.
Ed Thorpe?
Yeah.
Is that what you're going to say?
I mean, what I would say is like, I don't know him that well. I haven't read any of his books, but what I liked was the kind of the ability to like not stay like locked into just like making money forever, you know? And he was so successful pretty early on in his career. And he was like, okay, like I'll still do fun things. I'll still learn. I'll still like explore things and like keep busy, but I won't try to like have the biggest hedge fund in the world and you know, make billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it's very interesting because I've almost never heard of someone, especially like in finance, that chose to do that. So it seems like a very rare trait. And I think the way that he's been able to, you know, build a family and have, work out a lot and all of those pieces, still be very like successful, still be very like driven, I would say. I don't think he's less driven by not trying to keep going on sort of that hamster wheel. I think that's pretty amazing. So that's one.
Yeah, he's also appeared on Tim Ferriss, and I've been meaning to check out that episode because he's still living, and so a guide that we can
Two episodes. It's really good.
You've heard them.
Yeah.
Wow. What source of beauty in your life do you wish you could have more of, or that you expect to have more of in the near future?
Yeah. So another thing for me is like, I do find I feel better. We have an amazing office, but I think one part that we don't have here, and we didn't even have in our old office, was like any sort of like nature and that vibe. And I think we're lucky to live in LA and have a lot of access to that. But I've found that I haven't like experienced that as much recently. And so I think that that's one thing I tried to do during the 36 hours of just like going to a park, stuff like that like I haven't done as much of, but like feels very good and feels very like human. So that's one.
I love it. With so much of your life online, on the phone, on building it, how do you maintain presence? How do you maintain the ability to just be with somebody? How do you maintain the ability to be human?
Yeah, so that was like the first question I asked, which is what led to me doing the 36-hour thing. Because it was like, I would come home, I was like tired, so I would just want to be on my phone because like I want to like unwind or whatever. And I think there's a challenge in like kind of turning it off. And I think like if I see this one more tweet, like I'm gonna know so much more type of mentality, which it's obviously wrong. So I think a little bit of like being able to disconnect and forcing presence, I think helps you learn to be more present even when you have your phone. And so, I think incorporating that more into my life, like I think I'll do it at least like once a month, that like 24-hour plus span of like no phone, no technology thing. And I think try to find more of those moments in my life where I don't feel like I need to always be like tapped in or checking. And I've gotten better at it. I used to like check email like every second, check Slack every second, have like every notification come up. Like a lot of those things I've reduced just because like most things are not urgent. Most things I don't need to see every second, so I have almost no notifications on, and that's been helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting because like part of it is hours that you spend building the brand. Another part is like making sure you don't lose yourself in that whole process. It's tough.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it would be a lot harder if it was just like myself alone. It's like the only founder. I can't really imagine that. Then I think now we have a really good team and everyone is very much in it together, and we found a really good rhythm, I think.
So when you look at where this is going, what would make you look back at the end of 2023 and being like, yo, we crushed this year. We did an unbelievable job and it went even better than we expected. What does that look like?
Great question. And we sort of try to map out both in terms of like, where is this brand going to be 10 years from now, but also like, where do we want to be at the end of the year? And I think we've done a pretty good job so far of getting to that or exceeding that every year. And so, we think about it in a way of like, this brand feels very universal and we want it to be as big as it should be, whatever that number ends up being, right? Like, we're not here saying like this needs to be 1 billion, 10 billion, whatever the number ends up being. Like it's a little bit weird to think right now. And so it's really like we set goals around obviously where we want to be growth wise, but also like on the retail side, what are we doing this year? What would feel successful? We're opening our first like flagship store this year, so that's going to be an amazing moment. We're opening stores all around the world this year. We're trying to work with some like great partners all around the world because we've never really sold product through other stores yet. So those feel like big steps. And then I think at a brand level, how do we continue to have everything feel and be more cohesive around this idea of optimism and mental health and really pushing the conversation forward in everything we do, in our content, in our apparel, in our partnerships. And so those are really the goals. And again, we feel like when the inputs have been right, then like the outputs have worked out, and it hasn't been like so mathy every time of like this percentage this and this percentage this. And just try to continue to get better and get out of our own way and do things that we know feel like the brand and are the brand.
What are some of those inputs that you're using?
So our biggest brand differentiator is that like we're a brand that is very positive, is very optimistic, and then has this larger mission around creating conversation around mental health. So does that come across in everything that we do? And is it continuing to position us where we want to be positioned, right? We're also not positioned as like, the super mass like type of brand. You could buy it anywhere. Like it's in Target, it's in Walmart, it's not. So it's like with our brand positioning and with the lens we've chosen, are we executing against that like we think we are? And are we getting better at doing that? Because it's hard to make everything always be like perfectly cohesive. But if we're not getting better at that every year, then we're going to reach some sort of dead end. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because what you've achieved is like almost an exclusive thing that's inclusive. Do you feel that as well? Like it feels as if it's an aspirational brand, but it's something that everyone can associate with. It's a weird balance you guys are.
I know, it's like Madhappy, So
Yeah.
So I think for us, it's I think that's a part of it. I think we want to feel like a very inclusive brand, and in many, many ways we are. And I think that we've done a good job of like, it's not just about buying clothes. Like everyone can be part of the community, whether you're listening to one of our podcasts, coming to one of our stores. Like you don't need to buy something to be a part of it. And I think like the best brands have a flair of both, right? I would say Nike is the most inclusive brand in terms of everyone wears it all over the world. But then they did the Virgil collab, which was the hardest thing in the world to ever get. And to get one of those shoes was like the most exclusive thing, And I think there is something to like the duality of that. And I don't think that everyone needs to be able to get everything for them to like feel like your brand's inclusive. I think it's all about your messaging, your intention, how you do things. And the excitement around product is also like a time scarcity thing, that does play a role. And I think it's an exciting role in our brand.
In 2018, you retweeted Naval, who said, become the best in the world at what you do. Keep reiterating or keep refining. Thank you. My misspelling here of my own word. Yeah, I need to work on my handwriting. I wrote it here on the way here, but keep refining what you do until it is true. So I'll say that again. Become the best in the world at what you do. Keep refining what you do until this is true.
Wow.
What are you the best in the world at? Or what have you refined yourself to be the best in the world at?
Yeah, I think it'd be a little bit weird today for me to say that I'm the best in the world at something. I think.
Come on, Peiman, talk that shit. Talk that shit.
I know. I do know what I am really good at, and I've continued to refine that around being able to have a wide lens of things that like I'm curious about and learn about, and then figuring out how to apply that and in that energy into what we're building at Madhappy. And so I think that sort of view and mindset has allowed me to be a unique benefit to the company because it's like a very different approach than most people in the space where they're super focused on apparel or fashion and really know about that. And I think that learning from a lot of different things has allowed me to be really good at what I'm doing today.
What did you realize you were good at? Looking at the whole spectrum.
I think that's what started in sort of like 6th or 7th grade for me, which was like I was always like learning about things, not necessarily because like we had to in school, but really because like I was interested in it. And then I found that like someone who was like a lot older than me would bring something up and like I knew something about that. And I was like, oh, like that's interesting. Like it could impact me in a positive way by being able to know that or figuring out how to connect with this person or email that person and those sorts of things like start to become like clear that like I was good at that.
You've said before that you've always felt older than you actually are. How old do you feel right now?
I don't know, maybe like 35.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why is that the case?
I think it has to do with like, I don't know. I've tried to be very like since an early age, like I always wanted to like work really hard because I was like, oh, I believe in myself that like I could accomplish something great, whatever that was, even if that wasn't starting a company. And I think that made me have this mindset of like, well, like, I'm in 8th grade, but like it's fine if I know something that someone in 12th grade knows, you know, and then that sort of same thing of like getting along with people that are a lot older than me, being able to talk to them, being able to learn from them, those sorts of things, which maybe aren't as like innate to everybody at a younger age, to me just felt very normal and natural. And it didn't feel like I was just trying to like talk to someone who was 60 to talk to someone who was older or successful, but it was like, felt like more of who I was, you know? And so I think that has helped me a lot.
Where does the desire to be great stem from?
I mean, I think that's definitely deeper. I think for me, it's hard to say like where was it born, you know, because it's like I've always, ever since I could remember, wanted to do my best, work really hard, and be successful in whatever it was that I was doing at the time. I think a lot of that is probably due to moving to a new country, feeling like I didn't fit in, and seeing like success around me and wanting that in some way for myself. I think as I've gotten older, what I've gotten better at refining is understanding more of the pieces of like what success means to me. And of course, money plays a role in that. But, you know, before you might think, oh, you want to be famous, or, oh, you want to have $1 billion and that's what success is. But now it's like such a more well-rounded concept in my head, sort of the Ed Thorpe thing we were talking about of like your health, your relationships, financial success, and then just like feeling good, you know, like those things are really like what drive me now. But I think I always had that drive, and then I just refined what that was for me.
What percentage of, can you break those percentages down in your head? What percentages of your own success is based on money? What percentage of your own success is based on relationships?
I think it's like a well-rounded thing, which is like you need them all, and there are things that you know, like health, relationships, and like finances. Those are probably like the 3 legs of the stool that like you want to feel good about for whatever that means for you and at whatever stage you are in your life, you know? So I know for me right now, it's like putting some of those foundational pieces in place. So like having a successful business early on helps alleviate some of those things, because once you reach a minimum threshold, then like, you know, you're in a lot better of a place to be able to continue to build on that. But obviously during that time, I've also chosen to have great relationships and work on my health. Could I work on those things like more? Technically, yes. But obviously some of the stuff I'm sacrificing now is to try to make our business as successful as possible and have it make a really big impact. And so I think they all change at different times of your life, but you have to have, or I've had this like sort of like 3-legged mindset to it.
Speaking about the relationships piece of it, what makes for a good parent? And I know you're not a parent right now, but I'm curious, in what ways did your parents do an amazing job? And in what ways did your parents do things that you wish you could improve?
Well, I would say I think I've always thought that my parents did an amazing job just because of, you know, we grew up in LA, and you grow up around a lot of like success and different things. And I think it never made us like kind of just chase kind of more status symbol type things that instead of like the real stuff of like building something and trying to be successful and working hard. And like a lot of those values we learned from our parents, both from like how hard they worked, but also just how present they were in raising us. And I think that that's more rare than I thought. And I learned that after I started growing up. You know, it's hard to know when you're younger. And then I think, I mean, I don't know. I don't really have areas that I'm like, I mean, you know, things around mental health, right? It's like, oh, my mom was always like in therapy since we moved here because it was like hard for her. But like, I didn't really know until I was older. And I think pieces of that are like taboo, especially at the time, to like be talking about. And now obviously we talk about it all the time. But I think that and some of the stuff that's like more uncomfortable to talk about with parents or parents to kids or vice versa, I think some of those things I wish that I could have done more or known about more. And hopefully I'll do that with my kids. But I think everyone's also a product of their times, you know, and I think it's hard to think, you know, they also had so many challenging experiences, right? Like they left Iran in the late 70s because like everyone had to leave and there was a revolution and it was so scary. And like, that's a very traumatic event. And if you look at a lot of the people who moved here or moved all over the world from Iran at that time, like they deal with some very serious mental health challenges, and it's very like under addressed and very under talked about, but it's like very hard, and it's hard to think back and like how you would have reacted to something like that, but really thinking about that is super interesting.
What is going to be the most important lessons you instill in your future children?
I would say the first thing would probably be like kindness. I think one thing that my parents, at least always did their best to instill in us was that it's all about being like a good person, regardless of who you're talking to. So whether it's like a waiter or the president, like you should be really treating everyone the same. I think that's one thing I really want to instill in my kids. I think that ability and knowing that like you do have to work hard for the things you're interested in or the things that you want to go after, and not necessarily telling them that like any one path is the way, but whatever their path they think is, like you have to work really hard at that, or else like it's going to be very hard to be successful, and not try to just like sort of let them think that success just comes by waiting or like not really like being in action and moving. And that could mean changing like industries or what they're interested in every 3 months. Like I don't care about that, but it's like the ability to like learn and the curiosity piece and how that ties into hard work is definitely one I would try to instill. And then the last one would probably be, on the mental health side of just like trying, and hopefully by then I'll have many more tools to be able to pass down, but it's like this is like a real part of like everyone's life, and there's going to be times where you're really sad, and that's okay, and like you should talk about them in a way that allows you to like let that move through you and feel better, down the road. And there's going to be a lot of, when you're a kid, like everything is such a big deal, like when you got shoved in the locker, like that, if you think about it, like that's not like so crazy, like whatever, but like it's a huge deal at the time, and everyone's dealt with like bullies and stuff, and like at the time you're so scared, like, oh, I hope I don't see them at school, like all this stuff. And now you think about it, you're like, damn, like that's so like, it's like embarrassing that I was so scared. And so I think being able to deal with that as a kid, especially with social media, all this stuff is hard, and so being able to teach them that some sort of toolkit around that would be a big one.
Work hard, be kind, and learn about mental health. That's a good 3 trio for any person, really. I like to say work hard and be kind. If you can do that, it's all gravy. Talk to me about the best possible invention for humankind. If you were to think about what one thing you could invent or one discovery that could happen that would change the world, what would you say we're missing or we can discover?
Probably like a way to both like diagnose and help treat any sort of like illness, including mental, I think is probably a big one, because right now, if you think about it, we don't really know a lot about what's going on inside of us at all times. I think that's going to be another thing that people think is crazy, is like, it's so sad when you hear stories about, oh, someone found a cancer, but it was like too late. But it's like, we should know right when that happens. Or, oh, this person dealt with a very traumatic event, but now they just have to live with that for the rest of their life. And it's like, probably not, right? And there's probably going to be ways to treat all of these things sooner, and also like help people build an understanding of like, you go through a traumatic event. I think there's like a world where like, whether it's like a psilocybin thing or a ketamine thing treatment that someone does, and then like they're helped by that, and then they can live a more productive life. I think sometimes what happens is like things go on for so long, and then it's hard to like get them out of that. So I think that would be an amazing invention.
It's funny because stuff like psilocybin and ketamine are stuff where I feel like almost 5 years ago you would have been uncomfortable to bring up, or people would have been uncomfortable to say on a podcast. But today it's like part of the cultural narrative. It's inside the Overton window. So how do you think about psychedelics and ketamine? Have you personally explored any of that? And how do you,
I actually haven't, which is funny. But no, I mean, it's something that like my therapist, I've talked to him a lot about it, and there's a lot of amazing, of course, research happening in this space. And I think, again, like there are things that are very hard to get past just in talk therapy or just with medication. And I think there's clearly like a problem that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be new solutions to help the people who are like suffering the most. And so I think that's going to be a part of like daily life, and that's going to be a part of like a real treatment that like is helping cure some of these like serious mental illnesses that that people have. And I think it's going to be totally normal, you know, and it's going to be actually a more helpful way to do these things in a more long lasting way.
Yeah, I was doing research for this and found out, like in high school, you didn't drink, and you've never been into peer pressure. It's never affected you in any way. What do you say, or what would you say to somebody in high school or college listening to this who does deal with peer pressure and is trying to figure out, like, who wants to be Peiman in high school?
Yeah, well, it's probably like not true that I didn't deal with any peer pressure. Like, there's definitely things that I did because others did them. And I think that's like a kind of like a herd type thing that happens in like elementary and high school. But I think there were specific things that, yeah, like weren't for me. Like, I didn't drink in high school. I didn't like ever really smoke, like any of that stuff. I just wasn't really interested in it. But I would say, yeah, it's hard, you know, and it's like what I found was like, I think just like sticking to that for a long enough period of time, or even now, it's like I still don't really drink, and like my friends don't really like say anything anymore about it. But I did that for a long time, and every single time they would say, why aren't you doing this, or why aren't you doing that? And so I think, you know, I think over time, if you just stick to like what you think is right, and maybe you change your mind down the line, but I think that's what's important. And if you don't feel like doing something, then you just don't have to do it. And if someone's going to be annoying or laugh at you or whatever, like a month from now or a year from now, you're not even going to remember that. So I think that's what I would say. I don't know.
How did you come to the conclusion that you didn't want to drink anymore, and how did you go about doing that?
And I still drink a little bit, like maybe like once a month or something like that. I'm just like not super into it. I drank a lot in college, and it was a fun experience or whatever, but it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I need to do every weekend for the rest of my life. And I also feel like part of that is like the rest piece, and like wanting to feel good in the work we're doing and all of that stuff. And drinking just wasn't playing like a huge role in it. So like I reduced that. But then I also noticed, like, am I just reducing it to reduce it because like now I feel like because I don't drink, I'm like, I'm going to be better at work. And I was like, okay, like there can be some balance here, and I don't need to like fully cut something out to feel like, oh, I did a good job and I didn't do that thing. And also, you know, there's situational things as well, you know, and it's like, you know, if I go to a wedding and I'm with my girlfriend and stuff, I could drink and it'll be fun and whatever, but I'm not going to do it like 6 nights in a row, you know? So that I've just found like my own lane for doing whatever I think I want to do.
I love that. If you are talking to a recent college graduate and he wants to change the world someday, or she wants to change the world, what do you tell that person and advise that person on the most important skills that they should be learning to do so?
I think one thing I would say on the skill side is like it really depends on what it is you want to do, because there are certain things that, like, you know, you do need a more like formal education for, right? So like you can change the world and you could be a dentist and change the world, you know? So like there's many things. What I assume the question you're asking is like someone who wants to do, you know, maybe start their own business someday, make an impact in their own community or in the world or whatever. And I would say that starts with one, always like be learning, whether it's about your industry that you're interested in or the world or things you don't know anything about, because you don't know how that will help you later on. 2 is like always be asking people for help. That's like another skill, whether it's just talking to someone and asking them questions, even if like you don't really know if they're going to have a helpful answer. I think it helps open up doors that you don't know about. And then 3 is like just starting and trying something and being okay if it fails. Like it's trying something, starting a startup, starting a podcast like you did. Like it's just like nothing's going to happen if it doesn't work. Like no one's going to be like, oh, this guy started a podcast and it failed. And even if you stop doing the podcast today, everything you would have learned in that time would far outweigh like if you just worked at a company or you did like, you know, kind of the more traditional path. And so I think trying, learning, and asking people and trying to like learn from others is what I would say.
How do you figure out when to quit things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you kind of know. And what I mean by that is like, it just depends your level of belief in what it is that you're doing. And so if you're starting something as a side project that you're like, oh, this is cool, I'm interested in this, but I'm not like dying every day, and I don't think that this is like the 100% what I'm going to do for the next 5-10 years, then you find that path. You say a year, and if it's not at this, I'm going to stop doing it. But if it's like for you, when you started the podcast and you're like, I know this is what I want to do, and I want to do whatever it is for this to be successful, then it's like, there is no giving up. So, there's a big range. And I think that you as a person have to like come to terms and understand, like, am I just doing this because I think I'm going to make money from it? Or am I just doing it? Or is this actually what I really want to do? And then, what am I willing to sacrifice, give up, like, and do? And yeah, not every idea is going to be like the idea that you have to do for the rest of your life.
When do you feel most obsessed?
I think in different ways, but sometimes in like the work that I'm doing, especially when it's something that we've never done before, or something really tricky that we're trying to figure out, or something that we're trying to negotiate that's like very complicated and hard, and on paper doesn't seem like would work. I love those situations. I also just love when I'm like learning about something new in different ways, whether it's like reading about it and listening to like a podcast, and like kind of connecting the dots there, and trying to talk to someone in the space about it, and just like learn about something new in that way. Yeah.
Give me an example.
I mean, I would say like Web3, like I learned a lot just by listening to like Kevin Rose, and then I learned a lot from starting to explore and buy a few things that were like super cheap, and then I learned from talking to a lot of the biggest people in the space, and then meeting Kevin, and then like talking about like cool things, and like sharing our perspective on things, sharing how we're thinking about things, which is very different and comes from like a more consumer brand point of view, and helping that shape what I know, and so that's one example where I listened to stuff for so long, and my girlfriend was probably annoyed, but it was really fun experience.
Who is on your Mount Rushmore of learners? People who you look to and you're like, oh my God, I can study from this person, or
in the way that they learned, you would say?
In the way they learned, and like for you to seek information from them.
I think in terms of learners, like probably like Charlie Munger or like Warren Buffett, it's been very interesting to see like how little time they spend on actually like investments and stuff that they make, and how much time they spend like reading. And I think actually Naval talks about it as well, which is like, in some fashion, you always have to be learning if you want to succeed in whatever it is that you're doing, because if you're not, then like you're kind of closing yourself off and saying that I know enough today. So he would be another one. And I think just Andrew Huberman, like it's just like so cool to like see someone that's like so passionate about what he's doing, and so like next level. Like it's, if you talk about just like what his show is, which is like a very deep dive into different health topics, it's like a very simple concept, but then it's like, why did no one do it? Because no one cared enough. Like the amount of time that he's putting into every episode is something like I've never seen before, recording for 8-9 hours straight and having like the most dense, like it's not for everyone, but now it's like the number 2 or 3 show in the world is insane, and clearly like that guy's a learner.
Well, it's like his circles of competency are something so few people can replicate. It's like very few people are going to be a professor. So few people are going to want to be in media. So few people are going to want to teach others in that way. So like when you think about your own circles of competency, this is outside looking in. Projection is like, 1, you're a learner yourself. 2, you're in the design world in some perspective. 3, you're in the where the future is going. What am I missing in the pieces of your own circles of competency?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I think part of it is like trying to build a brand in today's day and age, with kind of like the learning pieces that we talked about, and my interests, and how that all maps to that. And not all of it does, but trying to have this like well-rounded way of doing it, and doing it our way. And so I think that those 3 things sort of come together in that sense.
I love it. Well, you've listened to the podcast. You know how I end these, which is with the challenge. A challenge points to the place in your heart you think we could take everything we've talked about, or something we haven't, and direct people to take some action to help them live the best possible version of their own lives. does a challenge come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few different ones. I think one is like, one thing would be just to go on more walks without your phone. I think that I've started to do that more. Even before I stopped, I did that thing last weekend. I think it's like so much of the time now we're spent like sitting, not doing anything inside, and trying to get outside, walk, and just like allow yourself to be a little bit more in nature, a little bit more uninterrupted is something that's been a big impact for me. So I would say that's a good challenge.
You said there was a couple.
Okay, I can keep going. So another one is like the human connection piece. Like I noticed that I always like call a lot of my friends when I'm driving or when I'm doing all these things, and I realize it helps me so much of just like catching up with friends, even if it's not about anything specifically, and just like feeling good with that, especially when like you feel like you're super busy, you don't get to hang out with all your friends as much as you want to, or it's just like, you know, you're bored and you want to like talk to someone. And I think that the feeling that you'll get and they'll get from that moment is something that like will help both people's days for the rest of that day.
Take a walk, call a friend. Peiman, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for you. Where should we send people to connect with you further?
I'm at Peiman Raf on Twitter, Instagram, and then also at Madhappy, basically on everything. So check us out.
Love it. All links below. Thank you so much.
Thank you.